Welcome to the Underwater Podcast, where we take a deep dive into the world of underwater portrait photography, cinematography, and everything in between. With me, your host, Brett Stanley. Welcome back to the Underwater Podcast, and this week, we're talking to photographer and director Scott Rhea. Scott's career ranges from shooting advertising and lifestyle images to directing music videos and commercials and into his amazing personal fine art work. But through it all, he's had a great love of being underwater. We chat about where he gets his inspiration from, the importance of meditation, and how the devastation from Hurricane Katrina brought about Scott's foray into the underwater world. All right, let's dive in. Scott, welcome to the Underwater Podcast.
Hey, Brad. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, of course, man. Where are you at the moment? Because I know you kind of travel a bit and you kind of live in a couple of different places.
I do. Primarily based in LA now, but I have been traveling for the last several weeks, and I was in Colorado and Utah, Louisiana. So yeah, I'm back here now for at least a couple of weeks.
Oh, that's great. How are things for you? Are you busy at the moment? Has the pandemic kind of thrown you for a loop as it has?
Well, I mean, I think you'd be hard pressed to find someone that didn't get affected by the pandemic and still affected in some ways. But no, it's, I've been using the time creatively. There's been several other outlets and several other projects that I've focused on. So yeah, I can claim survivorship there through the pandemic.
Yeah.
Now we at least phase one. Now, hey, who knows how many more phases we're in for, but.
Oh, that's right. Yeah. You don't know how many seasons this COVID thing's got. So let's throw things back a little bit, because I know you've had quite a long career in the creative arts. Where did you start? What was your kind of beginning into the artistic world?
Well, let's see. I guess it depends on how far back we want to go. But I was in a band in high school, and prior to that, 8th grade, I worked for my aunt and uncle who had a camera store in Meridian, Mississippi. And that's
nice.
where I first got my hands on a camera. And I was kind of a shy dude. So I thought, well, man, how in the world am I ever going to meet girls unless I get on the newspaper staff in high school? So I did that.
Yeah.
And that was my first experience with the darkroom, kind of developed my chops there. And then when our band went on tour for a couple of years, I'd had enough of music. I moved to Dallas, shot some corporate annual report work, realized that is not the direction that I wanted to go. So I started shooting fashion, which I'd always had a lot of interest in. And my career just took off. And it was about a 23-year career of working in the States and in Europe, shooting a lot of fashion, a lot of advertising, Neiman Marcus, Nordstrom's, a lot of catalog at that time, which was really well-paying work. I took a sabbatical, moved to Europe, shot editorial for a couple of years, realized that really wasn't really the direction long-term that I wanted to go with, but I can say that I had a really good career. I had a 10,000-foot studio in Dallas, Texas, and I traveled probably 240 days a year on average shooting. I'd be in Miami for at least 3 months a year, every year for a number of years. And then I had always had an urge to move into motion. So in 2008, I was chosen to be in a showcase called Group 101 Spots in Los Angeles. Several people apply, and they choose 12 people, and you shoot commercials, and then you get to work with huge ad agencies and showcase them, and it all happens over a 90-day period. So
wow.
So that went splendidly, with the exception that it all ended, and the showcase happened in October of 2008, which happens to be when Lehman Brothers hit and the world caught on fire. And so that was incredibly rough timing for that. But at that point, I still kind of stepped across the divide and started focusing more on motion work, music video, commercials, still shooting the still end of some campaigns, which was a real asset to some clients that I had that background, and they didn't have to hire 2 people. They could hire 1 person. And then that's kind of where it went from there. And then it's moved into, art installations, fine artwork. The underwater thing kind of came out of that period a little before in 2005. I'm from Louisiana, and Hurricane Katrina. In fact, I was in New Orleans for Jazz Fest in 2005. 2006 is when Katrina hit, and I had a lot of friends and family that lost everything. And I just started having a number of visions that I'd wake up and I would start journaling, and they were all underwater. And right. Although I was a diver, I had not really shot underwater much except for sport. And I went out And a friend of mine, Kareem Hamza, who owns Hollywood Divers, let me use his private pool, which happens to be he no longer lives there, but it happened to be at the time pool closest to the Hollywood Hills sign, and the house closest to the Hollywood Hills sign.
Oh, right, yeah.
So I went up and spent about 4 days, and myself and just 3 other people, and I went basically to test out some of these ideas and how I do them. And actually I ended up getting about 11 images over a couple of days that I still show now and have been bought by celebrities, and
that's awesome.
Kind of launched the adventure there.
Yeah. So how did you find that transition into the underwater? Like, was there, I mean, we're talking like 15 years ago. So there wouldn't have been much resources out there in terms of how do I do this?
There was no resources. I basically had no idea what I was doing. In fact, there's some pretty hilarious footage of me trying to sink wood sets with 3 people, which, for those of you out there that don't know, don't do that. That they float like a cork, and it takes, several hundred or 1,000 pounds to sink some wood sets. So, but by God, we got it down there, and we were using everything we could. I mean, giant lead anchors from movie sets and sandbags wrapped in plastic bags. So it was all complete trial and error. But the one thing that I did know is how I wanted it, coming from fashion background, you have to do a lot yourself. You have to do everything yourself. And so I was always a technical guy. Kodak would send me films to test. I did a few campaigns for Kodak, and I'd give them feedback. So I will always sit down and map out a schematic of what I want to do, how I want it to look. So even though I wasn't positive of how I was going to get that, I knew in my head what I wanted it to look like. Right. But I did have to go into there and, create my own snoots and create, had someone make, at that time, ABC Photo, which was over near El Segundo. The guy there, I went in and told him, hey, look, I want to be able to sync to a radio slave, out of the pool, because I was using a mix of lights. I was using strobe, some continuous lights, and some underwater lights that I needed to sync. And there just simply some of the hardware out there to do that. So he built some of that for me.
Cool.
And that's always kind of been a part of what I've done, is try to, if you can't figure it out, just MacGyver and make it happen, but don't give up, and it worked. It worked. And, the one thing that I was, always adamant about, and I preach a lot, is safety, because at that time, I would, after I did some of these shoots, I would have people send me photos, and I was just horrified to see people with power packs out by pools and no shock blocks, no safety precautions. So, right. So we did make sure that we had a lot of safety on set, even from the earliest stages.
I think that's definitely one of the most important things to keep in mind, right? Like, it's, the excitement of doing something underwater, you kind of do tend to forget the danger of what's going to happen. We can't breathe down there, and it's highly conducive to electrocuting yourself.
Absolutely. Yeah, absolutely. No, I had someone, American Photo Magazine did a couple of articles. I mean, in 2011, they did an article, and I had someone send me a picture of, they were shooting a pregnant woman, and there were cords all around. They sent me their set, a photo of their set, and there were cords everywhere. There were power packs. It was willy-nilly. And here's this woman standing barefoot at the edge of the pool. There's water all on the side of the pool. And I asked him, I said, you did have a GFCI and a shock block during this shoot, right? And he said, what's that? Okay. So, just completely terrifying. So you can't be too careful. I mean, even above ground, there's enough dangers. But as you just said, there's a lot of things that you really have to make sure you got dialed in when you take someone underwater as well, which hopefully the audience we're speaking to, we're talking to the choir. But in case we're not, that's absolutely something to be aware of.
Well, that is a good point, actually, because I think the demographic of the audience of this podcast is fairly wide. So any kind of information that we can kind of get across in terms of the safety stuff, because some of it isn't really, it's outside of common sense. Because if you haven't ever really thought about it, then you're not aware of it, if you know what I mean.
True. So, and there's been an evolution in what's available now too, as far as materials. I mean, that you can do a lot now with LED. I mean, there's some very, very powerful LED lights out there. So, in that case, you have nothing to worry about. But, if you're using continuous lighting, or if you're using strobes and you're having to hook into AC power, I absolutely go overkill with productions, and we have great big huge GFCI shock blocks that everything plugs into. So not only the power for what's happening on set, but the power for everything around the set, including hair dryers for the for the hair team, and everything electrical anywhere near that set is protected.
Yeah,
and
definitely.
I think it's important.
I mean that's the thing too, because looking at the sets you were building and the way you were shooting them, you were shooting with not available light, but constant lighting, right? So it was basically like a film set.
Oh, absolutely. Now we, early on, every time I shoot, I try to do something absolutely different. I try to push myself and push boundaries that haven't been explored yet. And one thing I wanted to do back in 2010 was shoot some really high speed phantom footage, and I knew exactly how I wanted some of these things to look. And when you're shooting phantom, which for those of you that don't know what a phantom camera is, a camera that it was originally designed for capturing ballistics, tracking what bullets do in the air. So it can shoot up to 15, now I think 1,800 frames a second.
Yeah,
and
right.
So I wanted to shoot at least 1,000 frames a second. So to do that underwater, you need an incredible amount of light. So on one shoot, we actually hired a soft sun, which a soft sun is 100K light. And it requires a 750 amp generator and a lot of people to handle it, and basically a crane system to get it over the pool. And so we're working with a lot of power there. And on the smaller end, it was still power packs, Dynalite power packs at the time, 2,000 and 1,000 watt lights. So that was kind of the range, was anything from an 18K HMI to a soft sun to continuous lighting LED. So I kind of just depends on the shoot, depends on the depth, and depends on what we're trying to do as far as the complexity goes.
I mean, that was interesting. So because I saw that installation, the Flux one that you did, which is with the Phantom camera, and it is incredible. It looks so buttery smooth, and the movements, and the way you kind of rack the frame rate to kind of bring them in fast and then slow them down.
Right.
It's like that movie 300. It was just beautiful.
Well, thank you. Yeah, it's amazing what the eye doesn't see. I mean, a lot of that footage that we're speaking of, you're looking at 2-3 seconds of actual time footage. Yeah. But at 1,000 frames a second, it plays out as 20 seconds of footage. So you're getting to see things that your eye would never capture. How how air expands around the body and the bubbles move and what happens around the face. I mean, it's all something that's pretty spectacular to see, because it's not something you would see normally in real time with the human eye.
Oh, absolutely. And it's hypnotic as well. People listening to the show know that I kind of, I love the Apple screensavers that are happening at the moment, because they're all these, slow motion drone shots and underwater shots through the kelp and stuff. And I kind of just sit there and I forget how long I've been watching these things for.
Right.
It's you just get lost in the detail of it. Like, it's not like a still photo where you kind of look at it and go, okay, I've seen it all. Right. And it's not like a video clip where you're like, well, that's over now. It is so long and so intricate, and things are moving so slowly that you kind of like, oh my God, look at that bubble.
Yeah. No, it's mesmerizing. And then also what you can do then is kind of reverse engineer your ideas around that. Knowing how things play out can kind of redetermine how you're going to approach things creatively. So on a lot of that stuff, I knew what I was going for. Now, always there's chance that happens and things that you discover. And that's one thing that I always preach is be as prepared as possible, be as planned as possible, and then let the magic happen from the things that you weren't expecting. But don't go in always expecting accidents to get your back, because that doesn't always happen. And also, I invested a lot of money, a lot of my own capital into doing this, and there's quite a bit of money in my earlier work and collection. And you time is money. And when you've got, my last few huge sets were 60 people and an 80-foot crane and big lights and generators and all this. And when you've got that kind of crew, you simply can't be unprepared. It's chaotic even when you are really prepared, because everything underwater takes 4 times longer or 5 times longer than it would on a dry shoot. Yeah. So preparedness, I can't say enough about. And even then you'll have days where it's like, you feel like all that preparation was for nothing, because, you'll have stuff, fly out of nowhere. That's the one thing you can't expect, is things to always pop up you weren't expecting. So.
Oh yeah. I mean, that's the thing with underwater, right? Like, there's always going to be something that goes wrong. And as long as you're covered as much as you can be, it kind of makes the difference, right?
Right. Well, and in some strange masochistic way, it's part of why I like shooting underwater is that I like being faced with challenges that I have no idea necessarily how I'm going to, get around and then having to do it. And I think part of that comes too, that when I was a fashion photographer, my primary work was lifestyle work. And it resulted in, you've got 8 or 10 people, you're shooting a beer commercial, and then you've got to create something that's real as can be, and capture that moment. So everything was spontaneous all the time. And I liked that work at the time. My private work, my personal work is completely different. It's completely planned and I try to execute it with as much thought and preparation as possible. But the previous training of shooting lifestyle work allows me to move quickly if I see something or think of something or there's a problem. And there's almost kind of a high that comes from that, when you have to solve a problem underwater quickly and you pull it off, there's a payoff for that.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's like being a rock climber. It is that sort of thing of, oh my God, but we just pulled that off. That was incredible.
That is a really excellent analogy. And I'm a climber and I, the same thing. I recently did the longest rappel. I did a 500-foot rappel.
Oh, wow.
We're 12,000 feet up. And let me tell you, it was quite an experience and a little bit puckering. I had not done this route and you have to transfer ropes 3 times. Yeah. And there, the guy I was with who owns a company called Base Camp in Ouray, Colorado, which is the little Switzerland of Colorado. We were up on this face and he said, in the mid transfer, look for this hook to the right. Well, this hook happens to be really small. So I get all the way down on the second leg and I'm out of rope and I'm like, well, wait a minute. And I look up and it's about 12 feet above me to the right. I drifted over and I couldn't see this transfer hook. So I had to, free climb up 12 feet. I'm still hanging, way off the ground and hook into a Purcell Prusik and then transfer ropes. And let me tell you, it was terrifying for a moment and then an exhilaration that lasted for about 3 days once I got on the ground. So, yeah.
Yeah. I think that's that feeling of success of when you, whether it's life threatening or not. I think that, when you get something that you didn't think was going to happen and then you make it work, I think that rush, is incredible.
It is. And it's difficult to explain to people that have not experienced that before. But to most of the creative audience that might be listening, they know exactly what we're talking about. It's the reason we do what we do. Not that you always have to put yourself in a perilous situation, but it's the reason people jump out of planes and so forth is, it's that payoff of challenging yourself, putting yourself up against the wall and then succeeding and sometimes failing. I mean, look, failure is a big part of that. There's people that fail and then quit and walk away. And there's people that fail and go, okay, wait a minute, crap. How do I go back and redo this and pull it off next time? And that's even a bigger payoff.
Definitely. And I think the failure is needed to make those successes feel as good as they do. Because if you succeed all the time, you get desensitized to it.
Absolutely.
But when there's the threat or, the risk of failure for whatever reason and for whatever result, that's just kind of like resetting you. It's like a reality check of, oh, that's right. Yeah, it's not as easy as I think it is.
Right. No, absolutely. Well, and I had something happen, and it hasn't been all that long ago, maybe 10 years ago, that changed my creative process completely. In my personal work, I meditate a lot, and that I would say that most all of my ideas come from not from a cognitive consciousness, but from a place during or after meditation. And I used to, and still do, I will sit down and I will sometimes, it floods out of me. Ideas will flood out of me. And then there's days where nothing comes out. But there's days where I'll have 2 or 3 notebook pages full of ideas. And I used to sit down and look at these ideas and go, oh my God, that's stupid. What am I thinking? What was this about? Well, one day, and I don't know what the catalyst was for this, but one day I just sat down and said, you know what? I'm not going to judge any of these ideas. I'm going to look at them and I'm going to determine which ones I want to develop, but I'm not going to beat myself up over the ones that might have, seemed okay at the moment. And then I go back and deem them as silly because what that was doing was judging myself and judging my creativity, and it was shutting off this flow. And it was probably the most empowering thing that happened to me creatively was to not judge, not self-judge, and be able to discern what it was and elevate which ideas were going to serve me. So it's been very powerful for me to make that shift.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Like the kind of self-talk stuff I think we do as creatives sometimes kind of can stifle us in terms of like you say, like, oh, that idea was stupid. Why did I come up?
Right. No, absolutely. And I used to do it a lot in fashion. It's one reason that there's still a lot of fashion that will show up in my work, but I got really the whole fashion market is kind of silly. Number one, there's so much duplicity. Stephen Meisel will shoot something, and now there's 200,000 photographers trying to do that same editorial. Yeah. And there's all this validation by other people that based on what other people have done. And to me, that's another thing is that's the kiss of death. Is like, we don't need 200,000 Stephen Meisels out there shooting something,
right.
We need people really pushing to try to find an original idea, an original voice. And so that's another thing too, that is if I don't have an idea now that I deem as completely original and something that's going to push to the next level and I can keep raising the bar, then I just don't shoot. Because why spend that time? Why spend those resources? Why waste time? So I'm not as prolific as a lot of people, but when I shoot, I try to make it matter. Yeah. And, as we spoke a little earlier, I went through some personal adversity with a divorce and so forth, and it just shut down my creativity. And I took a couple of years off and haven't really done much. And as of recent, it's coming back in full force. So it's going to be interesting to kind of see where some of that leads now, as far as raising the bar.
So is that kind of feel like your own sort of personal dogma, like your own personal set of guidelines, is that if you don't think it's innovative or if it's not something that you haven't seen before, then you don't do it, you don't pursue it?
I would say that for my personal work, yes. Now, commercial work, that's different. If someone comes to me and I'm shooting a music video, and most of the time when they do, I'm writing the treatment anyway. So I write the treatment and I can have some creative control over that. But yeah, overall, I just try not to duplicate something that has existed somewhere else. I try to push myself to create something that's new, that's fresh, or do it in a different way that hasn't been done. But yeah, it doesn't happen all the time, but of course that's the goal.
So with your commercial work, and say if you have a commercial client, like an agency come to you and they're like, we love this shot that Stephen Meisel's done, we want to do this. How do you handle that as a creative?
Well, there's times to where if there's enough people involved and it's the client and the agency have already had their background meetings and they come to you and they want you to execute something, that's what you've got to execute. Now, even with that, and I learned this in the fashion business because I would have people come and bring me someone else's ad. Probably the biggest one was a client once that brought me a Neiman Marcus ad and they wanted to duplicate it exactly. And I was pretty opposed to doing that because they literally, it was I think wanting to promote their credit card, and it was a credit card, ad that Neiman Marcus had done. And they literally down to the outfit that the model was wearing, they wanted to emulate this. And I did everything in my power to talk them out of that up front. And they wanted to do it. So what I did is when I got on set, I had already pre-thought of, okay, how can I approach this that better than what this looks like? So I brought in a whole different sense of motion. I directed it differently. I actually elevated it to where when they got to the editing stage and started looking at the images, of course, they fell in love with the ones that I was promoting. So I pull that out that way. Now, hey, they're the client, they're writing the check. So you do what they ask. But I think you have a duty to try to always, it's one reason they hire you, is to be reliable and to help, co-create and elevate ideas, even on the agency level,
Right. Yeah. And I guess you have a kind of like a personal responsibility to yourself and to the art to kind of push it again, like to kind of, to not cookie cut it every time.
Oh, no, absolutely. Absolutely. And in most cases that comes when you get boards from an agency or, in your initial meetings, you normally are able to share those ideas and then, craft that direction somewhat or co-craft that direction with the creatives there at the agency. But as with everything, there's a range of what you're going to run into over your career. So,
Right.
but yeah, as much as you can. And if you become known for having those skills, if you become known for, hey, wow, okay, this is what we think we want to do, but let's bring it to Scott and see what he has to say about it. And then you're able to give them quality feedback and direction.
Yeah.
Then it just validates your authenticity for why they're hiring you.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And has your underwater stuff entered into the commercial world? Have you had many commercial projects that have wanted the underwater stuff?
Yeah, I have. It's been interesting. When I first did this, though, when those visions showed up after Katrina, and I thought, man, this is the personal work that I've been looking to create. I felt it coming, but I didn't know what it was going to be. But then that showed up, and I almost protected it like a baby. And I was like, I'm not going to bastardize this by trying to commercialize it, because I'd shot so much commercial stuff that, it was just soul wrenching, but paid the bills. And I didn't want this to become that way. So I've actually been careful with that I don't want to sell out this work because it's still very private to me and very personal. And I did break a lot of new ground early on. Yeah. And I wanted to kind of keep that. But no, there is now, especially with advertising and especially with advertising in Europe. I've worked a good bit in Europe and had ultimately planned to relocate to Europe right when the pandemic broke out. That May, I was planning to move to Spain. Yeah. And as we know what that story happened. But so no, I'm now with the work in Europe, like even a lot of the commercial work is absolutely stunning and beautiful. Some as well in America. America, is a little more flat on some of the creativity with some commercials, but that's changing also. Yeah. So no, not that it won't happen, but the underwater work has certainly been a passion work and a private expression for me.
Yeah. And speaking of like the music videos and the film world and stuff, because I think we originally met on the set for a music video you were shooting a few years ago.
Absolutely.
And that was out of Spain, wasn't it?
Yeah. That was David Bisbal, a big, very, very huge pop artist there. And that music video was actually nominated for Los Cadenta Award, which was it was nominated for Best Music Video in Spain and Latin America. It didn't win, but it got a nomination, and I did go to the Madrid Awards, and that was pretty exciting. So yeah.
So how did they get hold of you for that? Did that come through from your photographic work, or was it from other directing work? Or
someone in Europe had seen it and contacted the record company, and the artist had seen it, and they contacted me out of nowhere, out of the blue. And then it turns out it's a very small world. So there was a DP that knew me, that knew the record label over there. And we ended up having mutual friends. And, it's just, you find out there's definitely less than 6 degrees of separation. I think there's closer to 2 in a lot of cases. So.
Especially in the underwater stuff as well.
Oh, absolutely. In the underwater world. Yeah, for sure.
So in terms of the music videos and the installation art, where is that being kind of shown? Like, what are you doing? Are you investing in the installation art yourself and then trying to, I guess, get that shown, or are people coming to you and kind of commissioning it?
Well, there's a lot of public art happening worldwide right now. There are programs. There's in America, there's a program called Percent for Art programs that basically, when they build a high-rise building or an expansion to an airport, they either have to pay a certain tax or they have to put that amount of tax into a public art project. So there's a lot of great opportunities, and there's some very, very big companies out there doing this. LAX, for example, all that interactive art in there is done by a company called Moment Factory. And and those are the multi-million-dollar projects, but there's a lot of stuff in between. So there's some interesting opportunities out there, and I was fortunate to be able to be awarded one and did one, and then did another one that wasn't water related. And I've got a lot of friends in the AR/VR world right now. So I'm integrating some of that. We're about to do some test projects on an XR stage that will involve all kinds of media and all kinds of, underwater and not underwater concepts.
Yeah.
So, and I've got a lot of friends that are engineers and developers in some of that technology, interactive technology. So it's just one more platform for me to kind of keep elevating ideas and expanding the toolbox there of what's possible and get paid for it. So, So there's just some fascinating stuff happening, and it's changing at the speed of light. I mean, my God, every year is just phenomenal what's coming out. It's crazy.
Oh, yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, just in the, like you mentioned, the AR and the VR kind of world, like the crap that's coming out from that. And especially because I spoke to Casey Sapp, who runs a company that does that, has done underwater VR and 360 VR and all that sort of stuff. Right. And just being able to sort of give people that immersive experience of somewhere that they might not have ever been. I think that's such an exciting world to be in.
Oh, it's very exciting. I mean, the final frontier, and this is something I've said for 15 years, but the final frontier is not really execution of how something's shot or what the camera is or whatever. It's a good idea. Do you have a good idea? Do you consistently have good ideas? That is the final frontier, because there's like I said, the duplicity. There's a million people doing the same crap. And, and there's a million, and that may be an understatement, pictures of beautiful girls floating underwater. And that's okay. It's good. But I mean, the amount of like really stellar ideas, that's the final frontier is aiming, and it goes across platforms. It doesn't matter whether you're shooting underwater or if you're shooting above water, you're shooting in the fashion industry. It's all about how the quality of your idea and how you execute it.
And do you think that sort of new innovative ideas, do you think that's a bottomless well? Do you think it can go on forever?
I mean, I forgot who said it, but someone said, "Oh, there's no new ideas." I've never agreed with that ever. I am positive there are new ideas, and they're. I mean, just look. I mean, one thing that invalidates that idea is look at the tech industry. I mean, most people don't see technology as creative, or even the medical industry as creative. It is. It takes really brilliant minds bringing things from a completely unknown point of view to create a lot of what's happening, in the tech world. So it's the same thing in the creative arts, in the creative industry. So, you have to push for it. Part of it, I think, is what you tell, if you tell yourself, I don't have a new idea or I don't have a creative, and then you're just going to go and duplicate other work or something, then that's where you stop. But if you actually, and that's where for me, meditation, getting to a different place, like I said, very seldom do great ideas come out of my cognitive brain. They typically come either during a deeper state of consciousness or after I've spent a lot of time in that state of consciousness and then come out. And sadly, a lot of times it happens when I'm driving and I'm on the freeway. So I always keep a notebook with me. And there have been times where I've had to just pull over and go, oh my God, I've got to get this down, because, if you don't, you get home and go, wait a minute, what was that idea? Damn, it was so good,
Yeah. And it's like a dream, right? Where you just like straight away you've had it. It's like, it's so real. It's so perfect. And every detail of it. But the further you get away from it, the more it kind of disappears into the mist a little bit. And you're like,
absolutely. And that's why there's always a notebook by my bed. There's always a notebook by my bed and always one in the car. And then I'm usually covered. And if for some reason I have, I'll hit the record button on my phone and I have a special file that if there are ideas I'm thinking about. Of course, I've learned also to be detailed, because sometimes I'll speak into my phone and rattle off some things that you listen to 2 days later and go, what the hell what was I meaning?
Totally.
What?
Yeah. Because I use Notepad on my phone to kind of jot down ideas and stuff.
Right.
And I'll look back at them like a year later, because I'll have forgotten to do it. And I'll look back at it and go, what does it? This just says spoons. What does spoons mean? Like
exactly.
What was I trying to do?
Exactly. No, I had the other day it was something, and I went back and looked at my notes. Said dark room, chair, light through door, and I couldn't. I know at the time the vision was in my head, but when I went back and looked at my notes, it did not connect the dots. So I'm still waiting for that to come back. I'm sure it will. It's just a slow moving neuron,
So one thing that fascinates me, and one thing I've tried to kind of do on this show, is talk about inspiration and where people get inspiration from, and how they I guess, cultivate it, whether there's any processes they had. And I just thought of something then, which was kind of on purpose being very vague about your ideas when you write them down, so that when you see them again, it actually sparks a different idea because you reinterpreted it.
Yeah. Yeah. Oh, absolutely. No, that does happen. That does happen. Absolutely. And, a lot of my inspiration, I don't know, it's almost like a blues musician, I guess, has come from adversity, challenges, challenging times, challenging things in my life. And I've been either gifted or cursed with the fact that whenever I get in a situation like that, that's emotionally challenging, it generally turns into visual metaphors. Like I will start seeing pictures, and sometimes I will see pictures and I don't know what they mean, and I'll go back and I'll reinterpret them. And often it's almost like interpreting a dream. I can kind of start to piece together what those things mean. But the image that I did called Lessons, which is a little girl on a ladder trying to reach a chalkboard, and all the letters are falling off the chalkboard. That image showed up exactly as it's captured, and I really had no idea at the moment. It took me about 48 hours, and it was very clear. There was two things going on. One was that was during the 08-09 crash, and there was a lot of stuff going on. So there was a lot of personal lessons that I was going through.
Yeah.
But my oldest daughter had been struggling, and it wasn't until about 3 years later we found out that she was severely dyslexic. And for kids that are dyslexic, words will literally move off the page, they'll change position. So that image has a lot to do with both those things, personal lessons and the challenges that my daughter was going through with dyslexia. And so I would say that probably about half my work or so comes from my mind interpreting emotional states of consciousness.
Yeah. And I know you kind of covered this a bit, but do you tend to go in with your concepts with a very particular message, or is it kind of interpreted after you do it as to what it...
I mean, it depends. There's times to where if I'm feeling something, I may sit down and go, okay, what does that look like? What does that feeling look like? If there's something going on in my life, and I might just sit down in the meditation and go, what does that look like? And pictures will start showing up. The one thing that I don't do, which is what I used to do early in the fashion career, was like, oh, I'm going to make a pretty picture. I'm going to make something cool. I think I've evolved a little out of that state, because then you end up either duplicating something or you end up, creating something that really has no meaning. And not to say that that's not okay, because it is okay. There's times where you can do that. Just for me and in my process, it's not okay, because I'm using this as my personal expression for art. But it is totally okay to go shoot a beauty shot underwater and have it not really mean anything. That's okay, because there's a place for that too. But for me, yeah, and that's one reason why, recently I think just taking a couple of years off and sitting down and looking at what's happened over the last couple of years and starting to put a picture to it, there's some very, very powerful images showing up. And my biggest challenge is they're all really big, and most of my work has all been very big, and big equals money, and big equals people and time and so forth. And if you don't have a patron or someone funding that, then you have to figure out, okay, well, how do I execute that? Which at this current time has been an interesting challenge for me that has also led to another creative avenue. And that is, okay, how do I get this idea across? How do I get this big idea across without having to employ 60 people and a huge tank and all this?
Yeah.
And that alone, asking that question, has also resulted in some really interesting caveats to how to do that. So that's going to be coming up in the next few months, that I'll be exploring some of those. We'll let you know how they work out.
Yeah, that's awesome. Looking forward to that. I mean, that's the other thing too, is the business side of this. Like, as someone who is, doing personal work, and then I assume you're, with your stills, you're creating them and then approaching galleries and sort of selling these images. Is that kind of your kind of work?
Well, that's an interesting question. I've had a lot of success with galleries. I've been fortunate enough to have some shows like at some of the most prestigious galleries in Santa Fe, Miami, Dallas, a number of places. It's tough. The fine art world it's an interesting world. Most of the time, I mean, I execute from like from the storyboard phase all the way to the printing phase. I print my own work. I even had my own frame shop in Colorado. When I moved from Colorado, I don't have that now, but I even made my own frames. So it was completely, a passion project. Galleries take 50% of whatever they sell. So a lot of times by the time you create, pack, produce, you're doing it. It's not a profit center. It's
right.
it's a way for people to get to know your work. It's led to some commercial projects. It's led to some film projects by people seeing the work.
Yeah.
But it's, and part of that too is just how much I chose to invest in the work early, that it's hard to turn around and make a profit or survive off fine art work in that regard. So as much, I've done a lot of shows, and I was fortunate. I did at the LA Art Show about 5 years ago. I was able to do an external installation. We did a projection on the outside at the LA Art Show, cool. which was great. So there's been a lot of attaboy, projects, but I'm being more careful with those now because, I do a lot of big prints, and I've been fortunate enough to have clients that want really large prints. Yeah. But I don't know, there's just so much work and effort that goes into it, and often not quite as large a return. So I'm focusing energies in different areas right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Did you ever do any underwater stuff with film as opposed to digital?
No, everything was going. I was a holdout on the film side only because I'd done so much beta testing with Kodak, and I was tech head, and I knew film so well that when digital came along, I just early on I didn't see it. I could do more with film because I knew it so well. But then of course now it's like, my gosh, why would anybody waste their time? There's so much latitude with the new cameras. It's actually just blows my mind. Every time I look at what Ari's coming out with, or Blackmagic, or Red. It's crazy what these cameras are able to do.
Oh, totally. I've been shooting with the Blackmagics a lot lately, and for what they are, for the price point they are such an amazing camera.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. No, there's, that's the thing, is that there was a time to where, unless you came from a wealthy family, you couldn't get in the film business. It was so expensive to do anything in the film business. And now, man, there's like 12-year-old kids producing stuff that's just, jaw-dropping, astounding. So there's no more excuse with the hardware. There's no limitation because, for $3,000 now, you can shoot with a camera that, not all that long ago, it would have taken, $75,000 worth of hardware to get that image.
Yeah.
And the $3,000 camera might even be better now. So
and I think that throws back to your point about, it's not about the technology, it's about the ideas. Like that's the tradable commodity is the ideas. That's the thing that's going to push the envelope.
It is the final frontier. And then execution, because, it's funny. Everybody I get emails all the time. For whatever reason, people feel like they need to share everything they see underwater with me. But, and I see some stuff that's beautiful, and then I see some stuff that's just kind of crazy and silly. And then and then occasionally you'll see some ideas that were almost there, but then they're just not executed well. And then you'll see really beautifully executed bad ideas. So there's a whole range. But to me, the target is have a stellar idea, sit down and map it, and then figure out how to actually really execute it properly. And that's the holy grail,
So I do mentoring and I do workshops and stuff. So I deal with a lot of photographers from all different kind of experience levels. And I think the one thing that I really see that makes someone shine is that they have the ideas, but then they also execute it really well. I see, like you say, I see people who have amazing ideas but don't really do it very well. But having that little package of, this is my idea, which is really cool, and I've kind of spent some time to think about it and how to do it properly, I think that does the idea justice.
Right. And then you get into territory, which is who decides what a good idea is, you could do something that might look cheesy to someone, but it's like the most amazing thing that someone else has ever seen.
Yeah.
So, that definition has to be set with you, and having the ability to discern what is good and what's not. And not everybody can do that. Not everybody can develop that. There are things that can be developed. Creativity is a really strange animal. So much of it's in the eye of the beholder. And the thing is, to me, it has to come from a personal place. Otherwise, it's just manufactured. I mean,
Yeah.
if it speaks to something that you personally feel about, and it's got overtones of something personal, then it's going to come across that way, and people will perceive it and go, "Wait a minute, what's going on there?" Even if they don't understand the image, there's something more there. But again, if you're setting out to make a pretty image, that's okay. There's a market there too, but that's a different ball field.
Yeah, and I think, like you say, it is very subjective. I think as artists, we need to sit down and think, well, who am I doing this for? Am I doing this for myself? Am I doing it for the client? Am I doing it for the likes? The social media kind of stuff. And there's no wrong answer, so long as
there's
you're
no wrong
happy
answer.
with it.
Yeah, and you can actually be doing it for a multitude of things. I mean, hey, again, I still have to shoot commercial stuff, and it's definitely not art. And then that's one reason why I've been so protective of my art, is to kind of divide that line and have a crossover. But it's okay. I mean, there's no right or wrong. It's and sometimes you have to serve both sides of yourself. You got to serve your pocketbook and your financial needs, and then you also have to serve your artistic needs. So
exactly.
It's the most common dilemma that all artists, I think, struggle with.
Yeah,
that balance.
Yeah, it's definitely it's the balance between is this your career or is this your passion? And if it's both and it works, then that's, like you say, that's a holy grail in itself.
Absolutely. In fact, for me, and I don't share this with a lot of people, but I shot so much commercial work fashion-wise that there was a time that I could feel it inside of me. There was something that needed to get out, and it was driving me crazy.
Yeah.
But I couldn't get there. I couldn't think it. I couldn't let it out. But it was because I was working so much, and there was an association that every time I grabbed my camera, there was just this like ceiling. There was this limitation because of I was doing really fast paced, quick, high pressure work, and my brain somehow didn't go there. And it wasn't until I kind of pulled out of that and had some time away from that industry that I opened up that other side of myself and let that creativity come out. And so a lot of times it's just a matter of again, giving yourself time and giving yourself space to let those ideas come out. And once again, for me, it's meditation, because I wake up, and if I don't meditate, my brain will start spinning at 1,000 miles an hour, and it goes in all these different directions. And, if I even hope to have any creative thought come out of that, it would only be by accident.
Right.
So it's an issue of getting to a deeper place. And that's just my practice. It may not be for anyone else, but I am an advocate of allowing yourself to turn your brain off so that you can let something deeper show up.
No, I love that idea, because my brain's kind of similar. Like, my brain's like a hummingbird. It never really stops.
Right.
There's always noise in there. And sometimes, the signal will outweigh the noise, and I'll have, some sort of brilliant idea. But then it disappears back into the signal, into the noise again. That's why
absolutely.
That's why you got to write stuff down. But just the different people's process of cultivating their creativity is so interesting to me, because everyone is different. Everyone has a different way of doing it. And it's so personal.
And, it's very frustrating because there's times to where, you'll have a film commissioner call you and they want a treatment in 2 days. And, you're sitting down and you're like, okay, you're listening to the track and you're like, okay, come on, where are these ideas? And the harder you squeeze, the less that comes out. Yeah. So, my process with writing music video treatments was, to listen to the track with headphones on a couple of times, and then I'll play the track really low in the background and go about my day and go about my business. And then I'll go into some meditations. And then at some point, usually some ideas start showing up, but there's times that they don't. And then, you're getting closer to the deadline of delivery, and, anxiety kicks in a little bit. And then that strangles even more creativity from coming in.
Yeah.
So the process is, it's different. It's different for everyone. There's no full fail-safe way to approach it, I don't think.
Do you have things that you kind of turn to that spark inspiration, like music or films or paintings? Or
I'm a huge jazz fanatic, and I have been since I was 10. So I listen to a lot of jazz, and to me, there's just a connection with that music. I grew up in Louisiana. I spent a lot of time in New Orleans. I was a musician. I wasn't a jazz musician, but I was a musician. So music for sure is a huge catalyst for me, and all kinds of music. I mean, I listen to everything from, electronica, jazz, classical, a lot of ambient music. So it just depends. Sometimes that will actually put me into a particular state that gets the creative flow going. So
Right.
yeah, I would say music is music and nature. I've lived in nature. I split my time for a number of years. I lived in Telluride, Colorado, kept a place in LA. And when I wasn't working, I lived at 10,000 feet on top of a mountain.
Wow.
And I would just go get lost. I'm a backcountry guy. I like to go hiking and I'm a fly fisherman. And so getting in nature to me it's essential. I mean,
Yeah.
I will die if I'm not in nature at a certain point. In fact, I just came back from Colorado and Utah and traveling and we're shooting a pilot series for an adventure travel show. So that's an integral part of who I am. And for me, creatively, it pairs with that. When I'm in a city too long and I'm around too much noise, it's anti-creative for
Right.
me.
Yeah. Oh, that's really interesting. Scott, thanks so much for sharing everything. Just listening to the path you've taken and the way you kind of approach your work it's really inspiring. Thanks so much.
Yeah, Brett, man, thank you. And keep up the great work, man. You're doing some beautiful stuff.
Thank you, man. Appreciate it.
All right.
Thanks for listening, everyone. And as always, if you like the podcast, please subscribe, review, and share. If you'd like to support with the production of these episodes, you can purchase our very cool merchandise at theunderwaterpodcast.com. We've got branded coffee mugs, stickers, beer cozies, and posters featuring our amazing illustration and logo by Joe Hodino. If you'd like to connect with us or learn more about our guests, you can reach us at theunderwaterpodcast.com or on Instagram. We also have a Facebook group where you can discuss the episodes and even get your questions answered by our guests. There's a link to it in the show notes. Also, don't forget about Waterproof magazine, showcasing the best in underwater art. Read it online or purchase a print edition at waterproofmag.org. You can learn more about my underwater photography workshops and mentoring at brettstanley.com or Brett S Photo on Instagram. The Underwater Podcast is presented and produced by me, Brett Stanley, and our music is Neo by Oh Boy. Keep creating, everyone. I'll see you in the water.